This happened in my old job at a quiet, small outdoor mall where I worked as a guest services supervisor and worked closely with security. Part of our job was to walk around and offer help to people who looked like they needed it. On this weekend day, it was only girls working the office: Sarah, myself, and my best friend who was the security supervisor, Melody. There was also Juan, the bilingual housekeeper that was walking around and cleaning up guests' lazy habits of not throwing away trash. We were all about 22 to 25 years old at the time. It was Sarah's turn to go out and walk around. She's not gone long, however, and comes back with this short Hispanic man with a confused look on her face. She walks in with the man and comes up to the desk and tells me she thinks he needs help finding a job. We would advertise open jobs in the mall on our website, so it was very common for people, mostly high school kids, to come in and asking for a list of job openings. So I print one out and the man looks at me and shakes his head. He points at Sarah and says something in Spanish. None of us speak Spanish, so Melody calls for Juan over the radio to translate for us, which happened frequently since we lived in Southern California. Juan comes in, we tell him that the man wants something, but we can't understand him. Juan starts to talk to the man, who by then is speaking extremely fast and using a lot of hand motions. As I said, none of us understand what is being said, but the man keeps pointing to Sarah, myself, and then to Melody while shaking his head. Each time he points to us, Juan says no, and the man becomes more and more agitated. Juan keeps saying no and ends up pushing the man out of the office, and immediately Juan leaves our office. We call him back and ask what happened. He doesn't want to tell us and gets upset at us asking him. Finally, we get him to talk. The man told him that he wanted first to take Sarah with him, and then when we brought him back to the office, he decided he wanted to take me with him as well. He didn't want Melody because she had a ring on and looked angry. Juan kept asking him where he wanted to take us. The man said that the world was going to blow up, and he wanted to take us on his spaceship and go to another planet and have babies there. After Juan kept telling him no, that he couldn't take us, the man kept getting upset and said he would come back for us another day. Obviously, we were all freaked out, and since this was a quiet, small mall, there was no surveillance system in place. We each told our managers what had happened. We didn't see the man for several weeks until Sarah, Melody, and myself were all working alone again. The man walked in and came towards Sarah and myself. Melody jumped in front of him and started to yell at him to leave, but the man kept saying something and pointing at us, outside, and then up in the air, and then left. This happened again later that week. Management finally agreed to let us call the police after Juan and the man ran into each other. Management finally agreed to let us call the police after Juan and the man had ran into each other, and the man told Juan that he needed to get us to his spaceship by October 10th, because that was when he was going to blow up the mall. The police were notified, and we all gave our testimonies and descriptions of the man and the several encounters we had. By this point, Juan had turned in his 2 weeks' notice, unsure if it was due to this situation or what. On October 10th, there were several patrol cars in the parking lot and a few more uniformed police officers roaming around the mall, with one stationed in our office all day. Thankfully, by the end of the day, nothing had happened, and we never saw that man again.
A couple of years ago, I was living in a small 2-bedroom apartment. Just my small chihuahua and myself. For perspective, I was a 22-year-old, and the apartment I lived in was more like a large house that was separated into 3 sections, each with 3 different apartments. I only had one other neighbor living in these units, and he lived to my left. All the other units were vacant. I'd never felt unsafe living there until this incident. I'd leave for work during the week at around 7:30 a.m. and wouldn't return home until after 5 p.m. I had a definite daily routine. While I was at work, I would leave my dog in the living room area so she could lounge on the couch. In this area there were large sliding glass doors that led you to the backyard. When I would take Honey, my dog, out, there was a large red fence that wrapped around my yard and separated it from my neighbours' yards on my left, right, and behind. Besides my one fellow renter, there were a few houses that were occupied behind me. All of the people who lived around me seemed normal, and never made a lot of noise or caused any issues. So, one day, I went to work as usual. After work, I decided to go visit my friend for a little while. When I was there, I had this feeling that I should wait before going home. So, I stayed a little longer than I had originally planned. When I got home, it was around 9 p.m. I opened my door and called to Honey, as I normally do. She would always run up to me and jump around in excitement. This time, however, I noticed she was in her cage that I kept open, and it contained her food and water bowls. I kept calling her name, but she never responded. I started feeling a sense of dread. I walked up to her cage, and I immediately realized she was dead. At first I thought she had died of some sort of natural cause. I then looked up and realized the door to the second bedroom was wide open. I always keep it closed, and I knew I hadn't opened it before work. It was at that moment I knew someone had been in my house. My blood ran cold, and I ran outside and stood there in shock for a minute. Wanting to hear a familiar voice, I called my dad, who was, luckily, in town right then, and advised me to call the cops. The cop arrived at the apartment and immediately began saying that the dog probably died of natural causes. However, I showed her where the back gate was wide open, and several other clues someone else had been there. She still didn't believe me, and wouldn't do anything else until we did an autopsy on Honey, to show she had been killed. Fast forward a week later, and we get the autopsy results back. She had died of blunt force trauma to the head, and whoever did it to her had placed her in the cage and covered her up to make her look like she'd been sleeping. Our best guess is that the person killed her because she wouldn't stop barking. When a detective was sent to the apartment, he asked around to all of my neighbours, and no one had seen or heard anything. Also, the guy who lives beside me didn't have anyone break into his apartment, so I feel like whoever did this was looking for me. It's been 2 years since this incident, and the culprit was never caught.
I was driving back to my college from my family's house after Thanksgiving break. I was traveling through a rural area in the Midwest, and I suddenly had the urge to pee, badly. I was reading all the road signs I came across to see if there was a nearby town that I could stop at to find a gas station or something to use their restrooms. Unfortunately, the nearest town was 30-ish miles away, and I had to pee so badly it was unbearable. I finally made the decision to get off at the next exit that I found, even though they don't lead to any towns. Shortly after I pulled off on the next exit, I came across a gravel road. I thought this was perfect because I didn't want to get in trouble for exposing myself in front of anybody, and it was a very private road. So just so you're all aware, I'm female. It is very difficult for females to pee on the side of the road. I thought the best course of action would be to take my empty McDonald's cup and pee into that. I did just that, inside of my car, just in case anyone drove down the lonely road. I had finished my business and dumped the cup into the grass on the side of the road. I was starting my car and getting ready to turn my car around back the way I came when I saw a bright red car speeding down the road I was on. It startled me, but they drove right past. I thought to myself, it must be the locals out messing around. I started to drive off and I saw a dingy, rusted red pickup truck coming down the road after the car. They too drove past me. As they passed, though, I saw two male passengers who were staring straight at me. This freaked me out a bit, but I told myself all the more reason to get a move on. I still kept my eye on the pickup truck, though, and I saw them turning around, coming straight at me. This freaked me out so much I decided the best course of action would be to drive in their direction, continuing on the gravel road as opposed to turning around, giving them opportunity to chase after me. I drove right by them again and saw that they were grinning at me. I was so scared I hit the gas, which on gravel road doesn't do much good. I finally got a grip on the road and headed along the gravel road. I looked in my rearview mirror and they were following me again. I was freaked out. My hands were shaking. My foot was flooring the accelerator and I reached for my phone. Now, I'm not the person to call 911 in just any situation. In fact, I was scared to call 911 because I was afraid I was just being paranoid. But as I looked in my rearview mirror again and saw them gaining on me, I called the police. When I called the police, the operator picked up and I explained to her what was happening. During this phone call, the men in the pickup truck were so close that I couldn't see their front tires. I was sliding all around the gravel road, trying to stay on the phone with the operator. She was giving me directions to the nearest town several miles away. They followed me the entire way there, all the way until I reached the police station. I saw them turn around very quickly because they knew I was out of their reach. I definitely learned my lesson from this, and I think from now on I'll stick to peeing in public restrooms.
My friend, who we'll call Mary for anonymity's sake, used to belong to a church that was a branch off their main one in the Philippines, where she was born and where much of her family still lives. Mary's church was incredibly strict, claiming you'd be damned to hell if you so much as swore. They'd also have to attend church not once, but 3 days of the week. I had been at her church with her a few times, and I was wary from the start. For example, once the pastor learned I was a lesbian, he decided to make the whole sermon about me and how gays were doomed to hell. It really pissed me off and I didn't go with her again. So, a few months later, there's word that some of the higher up in the main church are stealing money. Word travelled to Mary's branch, and her and her family started to speak up, mainly her mother. Her mum would post on Facebook to warn other members about what was happening, and maybe help stop it. That was mistake number 1. Some church people, I really don't know what they're called, sent messages to Mary's mum, telling her to stop what she was doing. Being the badass that she is, she promptly told them to shove it. Mistake number 2. So, 2 priests actually show up at their door, unannounced the next day, and they demand they speak with the mother, and that Mary and her siblings go to their rooms. Scared, they obeyed, leaving their mother alone with these men. Now, nobody but her mum knows what happened, but what I can say is that they came out of their rooms to see her curled up on the floor, sobbing. Let me stop to emphasize for a moment that this lady is probably the toughest woman I've ever met. So for her to be like this really scared everyone. At this time, reports started popping up of people going missing over in the Philippines. And, with further research, They found that it was the people that spoke up against the church. I am dead serious here. Everyone's getting really scared, and Mary is confiding everything in me in the hope that I could help, which I tried, but couldn't do much. One night she's sitting in her living room while her siblings are asleep, and, lo and behold, the same two men show up again and start banging on their door like they're trying to break it down. Mary jumps behind the couch and frantically starts texting me while this is going on. It's midnight, and these psychos are trying to break her door in. I'm urging her to call the cops or her parents, who are out, and she's telling me that she's too scared. This goes on for 30 freaking minutes before they give up and leave. The moment they do, she rushes to her siblings' rooms, and they ran out, saying they heard everything. The final straw came when her aunt travelled back home to visit some friends, and the church actually tried to find her. At this point, the disappearances in the Philippines had grown in number, and police weren't finding anything, probably because they were tipped off, as Mary said. We don't have much more information on this particular incident, aside from the fact that, after her mum posted about it on Facebook, they were excommunicated. This is still ongoing, though a lot more subdued. Well, for them at least. The reason she can't post this story, or that I can't give her name, is because they're still tracking people down. If you know of anything that can help her, please let me know. I want my friend to be able to feel safe again.
I moved away from home early, when I was 16 all by myself. This happened when I was 16 or 17. I lived in a small town, although it was a dodgy area. I was sleeping safe and sound when I was woke by someone banging on my door. It was around 3 a.m. I think to myself, who's the idiot banging on my door at this hour? And ignore it. But this guy was very persistent. He carried on for I don't know how long. Then my curiosity makes me want to get up and have a look through the peephole, just to see who it is. It looks like a friend of mine called Jimmy, and he has a knack for getting himself into trouble, so I decide to open the door and find out what was going on. It wasn't Jimmy. It was some guy I've never seen before, high as the sky. Now any sensible person would happily shut the door and lock it. I didn't. Ah, curse you, naive small-town brain. His name is Bill, and he says he needs somewhere to stay during the night. Stupid me makes some vague, awful excuse that, I don't have a spare bed, just a small sofa and it won't be comfortable. And then this guy invites himself in to have a look. I stayed close to the front door because it dawned on me that there's a stranger now standing in my flat. My stupidity is an embarrassment. Back then I still had an unhealthy faith in humanity and not the heart to say no. Then he asked me if I'm Tony's girlfriend. You see, Tony is a respected man in criminal circuits, basically someone you do not want to mess with. I sure wasn't Tony's girlfriend, but thankfully he thought I was. After looking around my tiny flat, he decides to take off. He says he's going to look for other alternatives, but if he can't find anything, he'll come back. Me, only out of politeness, now says, "Of course." Before he goes out the door, he looks at me for a moment. Then he puts his index finger beneath my lower lip, looks me in the eye and says, "You're cute." He leaves, and I lock the door and go back to sleep. Bill never came back. The following day, I ask a group of friends if anyone knows who this guy is. I give a quick description and tell them what had happened last night. No one knew who this Bill was except one of my friends. His face dropped, wide open eyes, and he goes on to tell me, "Be real grateful Bill thought you were Tony's girlfriend. This guy has a history of sexually assaulting a 9-year-old girl." Lesson learned. I'm certain that thanks to Tony, I learned that lesson a lot less brutally.
This happened to me just about 2 hours ago, around 4:30 a.m. Around 4:30 a.m., and I can't get back to sleep. Every creak or drip of the faucet now makes me jump. I only stopped trembling about 15 to 20 minutes ago. So, I was asleep on my friend's couch and woke up to the sight of someone opening their front door. They may have said something to me through the cracked open door first, and either that or the door opening is what woke me up. This tall and very slender lady in a long, red salmon-colored dress, and something on her head, started moving towards me. I tried to pretend to still be asleep, but once she knelt down next to me, I knew the jig was up. I fully opened my eyes and looked over at her to make out her face. She put her hand on my shoulder and started asking me questions that I didn't understand. The sentences just seemed jumbled and incoherent, despite the fact that she was speaking English, the only language I know. She was holding a couple of papers. Almost seemed like she was asking me questions off of it. I sat up and asked why she just walked inside, and she said she was from some department or something, and asked for my name. I didn't respond and just kind of looked around. I debated calling out for my friends or running for one of their rooms, but I feared for my physical safety. I grabbed my phone to call one of them after the most awkward 30 seconds of silence. And she just told me, "I can see you're not ready yet. It's okay." And touched my arm and calmly walked out. I saw her walk towards the street from the window. I immediately made sure the doors were all locked, as these friends usually don't lock up, which I'm sure is how she was able to just walk in. In total shock, I tried to wake up my friends via phone and just sat on the couch and waited for my heart to stop racing, or at least slow down. After 15 minutes, I went upstairs and woke them up. The friend that I know better, Max, thought it was weird, but was mostly unconcerned. He apologized that this happened to me and went back to bed. The other friend, Brock, empathized and was also really freaked out. We sat in the stairwell for a bit before he went back to bed. I'm now back on the couch, but I don't know how to sleep anymore. I've never been more frightened and unnerved.
Let me start off by saying I'm a single gay male, so naturally I use apps like Grindr and Growler. Well, one night I get a message on Grindr from a local guy named Black B-Boy saying that he sees me all the time, which was kinda creepy to begin with since the profile pic was just a tongue sticking out and no noticeable features. Well, 2 days later I get another message asking if I smoked weed, to which I replied yes, sometimes, to be honest, and he invited me over to his apartment in our complex to smoke, to which I accepted. Everything started off innocent enough, conversation, smoking, though he seemed like he was already high before I got there, judging on how much he was giggling at little things. As the night goes on, he tells me that I need to take the weed with me because it was mine, that I told him to buy it for me, which I didn't, and I argued this fact that he offered that no mention of buying ever occurred. So just to shut him up, I told him that I would give him $40 the next day after work. Later that night after I left, he proceeds to text me that I need to give him the money or he's going to bring it over, or to my job. Again, I told him I'd bring him the $40 the next day. This continued several times the next day while I was at work, and by now he's getting on my nerves. Meanwhile, I'm telling him that I can't have the weed, nor do I want it, and to just give it to someone else or whatever. So after work, I get the money he's asking for. He tells me that I have to help him pay off his traffic ticket that he got because he went to give the weed to someone but got pulled over for not using a signal. So now he's telling me I have to give him $160 because he can't have a ticket because he's trying to get custody of his kids, which looking on it now, I doubt was even a factor. So I get another $140 to give to him, but now the traffic ticket has gone up to $200, which sends up a red flag, and I told him I couldn't or wouldn't pay him. To be perfectly clear, I was not giving him money to help him out, but out of self-defense to get him away from me, since I didn't know what to expect just in case he was dangerous. I had to backpedal my steps and tell him I lied about where I lived and worked, just so he wouldn't get them involved. But truthfully, I was glad I never gave him my name or got his, so he didn't have much to go on besides my physical description. I was afraid that he'd go looking at our apartment building asking for me, which is exactly what had happened. I quickly hid in the bedroom closet while my roommate answered the door and told him they haven't seen who he was looking for. I quickly called my boss and told him a very condensed version of the story and told him if someone comes looking for me who doesn't know my name, just what I look like, that I don't work there and that they don't know me. Then I get a barrage of texts asking if I have his cell phone from at least 5 different phone numbers, so I know they're all him, which is even more suspicious. I didn't reply to any of these, so eventually they stopped, but now I'm scared to leave the apartment except for work. So, crazy drug-pushing stalker, let's not meet, ever.
So, this happened about 8 or 9 years ago, when I was around 10 years old. My family and I moved to the murder capital of Canada at the time. Always a smart choice. I was just an average-looking young kid, attending the elementary school that happened to be attached to my backyard via a field. Since I lived in the same area, I often went exploring the streets, goofing around. Although it's known as the murder capital, I never really felt unsafe in my neighborhood, until this happened. So, during my lunch hour at school, my friends and I usually stayed at school or went to my friend's house to play The Sims. Clearly we were cool. On this day, during lunch hour, I was walking back to school with 2 of my male friends. On that particular day, we decided to walk to the strip mall, in the neighborhood over, to go to McDonald's. It was only a 15-minute walk away and half of it was on a very public road, so I wasn't too scared to walk there. On our way back, we were only maybe 2 blocks away from the school, when I noticed a really old, worn-out looking brown van driving in our direction. This van looked like it drove straight out of the 70s, but I didn't think anything of it. As the brown van got closer, I expected it to just drive by like any other car. But I kept my eye on it because, even as a kid, strange old vans are incredibly creepy. The van is about to pass us, and I start to feel more comfortable. But instead of driving past, the second the brown van reached us, the driver slammed on the brakes, and it came to an instant stop. The streets were usually dead at that time of the day, and I only looked at the van for a split second. but I was fairly certain I could see that there were 3 guys inside. Major red flag alert. I instantly realize I need to get out of there. So me being the only smart one within our trio, obviously I doubled my pace so I could get away from the van. My 2 male friends, for some reason which I will never understand, didn't find it creepy and stay behind at the speed that they were walking. That's when the driver backs up to exactly where I was, which was about 2 feet ahead of the others at this point. I refused to look at the van that time. My nerves wouldn't let me. My fight or flight moment had long gone, and I chose flight. I'm hoping that somehow, some way, the fact that they back up wasn't because I'd walked ahead. But then I hear the driver yell to me, "How much for one night?" I didn't exactly understand what it meant at the time, but it didn't sound good. As soon as he says this, I can hear a noise coming from the van, so I force myself to look over, and I clearly see that someone is trying to open the sliding door of the van from the inside. Within half a second of hearing the click of the door starting to open, I began sprinting to my friend's house, which, thankfully, was in sight from where we were, and thankfully my 2 male friends smartened up and started running too. I never once looked back, but after a few seconds I could hear the tires of the van speeding away. Once we got to my friend's house, after running inside, one of my friends told me, as the door started opening, one of the men seemed to be fiddling with something that looked like a gun. I tried to calm myself down by telling myself it was just some sick prank. It was probably just a BB gun or something along those lines. I didn't want to worry anyone by something that could easily have been a sick joke, so I didn't tell anyone when we got back to school. Fast forward to later that afternoon. Sitting in the computer lab, a classmate of mine comes in saying that some guys tried to abduct her during lunch hour in a brown van, but she'd run off before they could. She'd been walking from the direction I saw the van speed off in. There was no way it wasn't the same van. I freaked out and told her what happened to me during the same lunch hour. Next thing I know, I'm being dragged into the office by the principal, where there are policemen and women waiting for me. I spend the rest of the school day being questioned by police about the incident, because they were opening a case on the matter. I never did find out what happened with the case, or if the same thing happened to any other young girls. It's definitely possible that it could have been a sick joke that these guys just took too far. But either way, I'd never been so scared in my life.
I grew up in a small remote town. We had no public transport except a random bus that showed up once a week to take you in or out of town. I first left home at 17 and moved to a large town. When working, I often finished work between 12 to 4 in the morning. If I didn't feel like walking or couldn't get a ride, I would often call a taxi. On several occasions, I encountered drivers that would seemingly purposely drive me to the wrong place, despite their navigation system and my directions, for extra cash, obviously. And on one occasion when I had 2 $50 notes stuck together, the cab driver tried to take both, telling me I gave him one. At that time I lived with a housemate who was hardly home, which meant me at 17 basically had an entire house to myself. Despite some incidents with the taxi drivers, I wasn't aware of how damn right creepy some of them are. I'm in my 20s now, and people I've encountered tell me how some taxi drivers tried to molest them in the cab, rob them, and even kidnap them. With my story, it was about 1 to 2 in the morning. I caught a cab and the driver was asking me barely basic questions like most do, such as what do I do for a living and are you a local? The chat eventually changed to about where I was living. I made a comment that out of like 3 weeks of the month, I get the house to myself, which the driver replied, You probably shouldn't tell people that. Then somehow the air felt like it was sucked out, and I stopped talking to him. He did continue trying to get me talking. After I paid, he sat in the taxi with the lights on in the driveway. I originally thought that he was turning around, but he was there for ages. I heard a car door open and close when I was upstairs, yet ignored it until I heard the neighbor's dog bark. With the dog, it lived in the backyard of the neighbor's house. However, whenever someone went through our side gate, it would start barking. I freaked out and immediately turned on all the lights in the house. I also got my bedside weapon and then listened because I knew someone was in the backyard. I could hear someone trying all the downstairs doors and windows. I started calling the police. When I called the police, I was whispering into the line and ended up talking to the bitchiest woman on earth who talked to me like trash. Also, no matter how many times I repeated the situation, she would say, "So a taxi driver at your house? Did you order a cab?" I eventually heard a car door close and the taxi left. After telling bitch face this, she told me she'll get me fined if I prank called again. The next day I found large shoe print tracks all around the house, like someone walked around it several times. I am 100% sure the taxi driver was trying to break in, and I don't think it was for robbery.
I come from a family of people who enjoy walking, hiking, taking the dog out, after dinner walks, and so on. One way this manifested itself was me asking to be allowed to walk home from school while growing up. The way home was a little long for an elementary schooler with a loaded backpack, over 1.5 miles with steep hills for the last third of a mile. But when I was 11, my parents gave me permission to walk it in fair weather. The route took me across the street from elementary school, down a sidewalk parallel to the busy road. A half-mile later, I reached the middle school, walked past the track loop and the old oak with the bench underneath. After that point, it became residential, with the sidewalk slowly sloping downwards. After a few blocks, there was a stretch of privacy fence followed by a little park, ending in me turning left up the steep hill with my house at the very top in a cul-de-sac. Everything went smoothly that year, and most of the next year as well. Then, one day, as I was walking past the track loop, I saw something odd. There was someone sitting on the bench beneath the old oak tree. This was strange because the elementary school let out 45 minutes before the middle school. Until the final bell rang, the fields were empty, except for the occasional PE class. He was a little too old for a middle school student. Not parent old, but more like a high schooler, or in his early 20s. I absent-mindedly thought this as I walked past him. A few feet later, I hear a soft, clinking noise. The bench guy had stood up. He was wearing a metal wallet chain, something that was really popular with the older boys at the time. With every step he took, it would sway, making muted metallic sounds. After the sounds continued for some time, I glanced behind me. He was about 8 feet back, walking at a leisurely pace. So I continued past the houses, still hearing the clinking noise. I'm nearing the privacy fence, starting to feel scared. Is he following me? I take a quick glance behind me. There he is, 8 feet back. I walk faster, panicked. He is following me. I try to think what I should do. There's no one at the little park. My parents would be at work for 2 more hours, and I don't know if any of the neighbors were home. I reach my street and turn. He's still behind me. I jog, backpack thumping, breathing loud, drowning out the sound of the chain, to the top of the hill and the cul-de-sac. I don't look back. Normally, I would enter through the garage, but I was not going to give him the chance to get into the house. I went around, past the side garden and through the back gate. I used my key and darted inside. At this point, I just wanted to hug the family dog and hide, but I had to know if he was still out there. The kitchen window overlooked the side garden. He was there, looking at the back gate. I ducked below the sink. There was no disputing it. This man had followed me for almost a mile straight to my house. I was shaking. I crawled to the living room phone, afraid of being seen, and called my mum. The police came, and shortly after, my mum. But by then, the chain man had already left.
About 5 years ago, I lived in a co-ed residence at my university. This residence housed a few hundred undergraduates, with girls' wings and guys' wings on each floor. In my first year living in this residence, I spent a lot of time with my then boyfriend. He didn't have a roommate, but I did, so we usually hooked up in his room. The guys living in his wing were my good friends, except for Kyle. Kyle was a creep and an asshole. One night, I left my boyfriend's room to go to the bathroom after we had sex. I opened the door and Kyle was standing right there, like he had been listening through the door. My boyfriend and I yelled at Kyle, but Kyle laughed it off and walked into his own room. Kyle started following me around campus, calling me a whore, making sex sounds, and asking me if I liked it like that. If he saw me on campus, he would leave his group of friends to walk about 10 feet behind me and whisper. It started to freak me out, so I let campus security and my friends know. Kyle was on the football team, weighed at least 200 pounds, and I didn't feel like I could defend myself from him or outrun him. Campus security said that he couldn't do anything unless he actually harmed me. My friends started to help me keep an eye out for Kyle to avoid him. This continued on for 2 years. In my second year, I lived in the same residence but on the basement floor. My window was level with the ground, and if my blinds were open, anyone walking by could see right in. That year, I was stressed out from school and sometimes found myself falling asleep while studying. 3 times that year, I fell asleep with my blinds open and woke up to Kyle squatting to watch me through my bedroom window. Once, I took a nap in the library and woke up to Kyle sitting at my table, staring and grinning at me. I went to campus security, but they told me again that they couldn't do anything unless Kyle actually hurt me or entered my room. The next year, I lived off campus. I would take the train 2 stops from the university, then walk a block home. I hadn't seen Kyle in months and had kind of forgotten about him, until one day when I was catching the train home. I was standing on the train platform waiting for the northbound. The southbound train pulled up and Kyle got off. He noticeably saw me. Instead of exiting the platform with the rest of the passengers from the southbound train, Kyle waited on the platform. There was no connecting trains coming, just the north-south line, so it made no sense for Kyle to be waiting here. The northbound train pulled up and I got on. I tried to hide in the crowd, but it was too thin. Kyle followed me on the train and sat across from me. The train reached my stop and I didn't get off. I refused to let Kyle know where I lived. Kyle and I rode the train in silence to the end of the line and back to the university, an hour-plus trip. When we got back to the university, I got off the train and Kyle followed. The crowd was much larger this time and I felt safer. I left the train station, and when Kyle noticed I was walking towards the campus police station, He stopped following me. Fortunately, I haven't seen him since. To all the students out there, please go to the real police with complaints, not your school's worthless rent-a-cops.
We were 16, an age where you feel invincible. It was summer and school was out, and my friend and I, who lived in the same apartment complex as me, decided to go to the mall and kill time, as any other underage teenager would do. I don't remember much about that day, other than our walk home from the mall. It must have been around 9 when we left, since that's the time the mall closes. Our apartment building was 2 miles away from the mall, so of course we walked. It was hot out, and we both knew once we got home, there would be nothing to do. So, we opted for the walk. We enjoyed the conversation and the passing of time. Our town wasn't exactly dangerous. Yes, there were muggings and theft, but it wasn't as bad as other cities in our county where rape and unsolved murders were commonplace. So, we walked those 2 miles, oblivious to any potential threats. We were a mile in when we passed an intersection. Shortly thereafter, 3 males walked out of the opposite street and began walking behind us. I didn't think much of it. It's summer. They were young. It's hot. No reason to be suspicious. My friend, however, was unnerved. Hey. Yeah? Those guys behind us. What about them? I'm pretty sure they're following us. What? No. I just think you're being paranoid. As soon as I'd said that, one of the men started whistling at us. I turned around. What you got in the bag? We had shopping bags from the mall. Nothing. Leave us the fuck alone, my friend retorted. I remember being pissed. Why would she respond to them? At this point, I'm nervous as fuck. Turns out, my friend was right. Call it intuition. We begin walking faster now that we sense danger, and as we quicken our pace, so do the men. They know we're onto them. We near a plaza with a Del Taco, and as we enter the parking lot, the men disperse. One is directly behind us, and the other 2 are on our sides. I turn around. They all whip out fucking metal baseball bats out of nowhere. At this point, I turn to my friend and we hightail it to the Del Taco, not bothering to turn around. Thank God it wasn't too late, or they'd be closed and we'd have nowhere to hide. As soon as we enter the Del Taco, we look out the windows and witness all the men jump into a Cadillac Escalade that was parked. Were they only scaring us? Why the bats? Why the car? What the fuck is going on? We watch as the car drives away. That doesn't quell our fear. We spend about 10 minutes in the restaurant deciding what to do next. Do I call my dad to pick us up? Or do we walk the half-mile home? We didn't want our parents to worry. So, for some incomprehensible reason, we decide to walk. The whole time, we're constantly turning back, anticipating a black Escalade to pop out of nowhere and kidnap us. But it never did. As soon as we get home, we promise ourselves not to tell our parents, as it would hinder us from hanging out again. The moment I walked through the door, I blabbed to my parents. I later found out my friend did exactly the same. Scariest, experience of my young life.